Hi, friends. So this is our first lesson, discussing and writing about art. It's going to be the crux of what we do, and I want you to get comfortable with it. I also want to give you as much information up front, knowing that it will take time for all of you probably to absorb it and have it come very naturally as you work. Um, so sometimes you're really going to focus on the work itself, um, especially when we talk about minimalism. The work itself, its color, its texture, how it is, how we describe it, and that analysis is going to be the story. Other works are going to be driven a little more with context. And how we interpret a work is going to depend to some extent on the artist's intention and how well we both do our description formal analysis and contextual analysis. And that context could be history, it could be who the work was made for, it could also be your own interpretation as a viewer and what you come in terms of interpreting symbols or language, visual language, or possibly even textual. So, describe. It's the cornerstone for all your argumentation. I'll use the word evidentiary reasoning. When you are saying, this is going on, or this is what's happening in this work, how do we know it? It's got to be rooted in the descriptions that you give about the work. Ideally, you would hope that by describing this work, someone who's not even looking at it would have a really, really clear picture of what it is. I'm going to go through a bunch of the elements of design. You can find a lot of different lists of elements of design. This is a pretty comprehensive one, but there's still others that you'll find you use. For painting or 2D work in general, composition, the picture plane, right? Is it like the Renaissance, illusionistic? Is it linear perspective? Is it very flat? As we look at a lot of this abstract work, we see a lot of flattening of the picture plane. What kind of technique? What kind of brushwork? Things glazed? Is it painterly? Is it loose? Is it very meticulous? Right? Does it use contour lines? What's the technique that the artist is painting or drawing with? We also may talk about material in that context of, how in Jasper Johns' flag, how something caustic also will have newspaper in it, or in Rauschenberg's case. The texture of a work of art, the contrast, the shape. And you can use your own language for shapes. You might, be a math whiz and be saying dodecahedron. And I don't necessarily know what that is without looking that up, but and that's fine. But you could also talk about kind of geometric shape, many-sided shapes, any number of things. So you're going to find some of your language, your own language for that. Patterns, you'll talk about line. Also, you might see a group of lines together that sort of imply a movement throughout the piece. And so you could talk about a line that isn't there in that sense. The line that's charted by the work, getting your eye to move across a piece. Color, there's so many different things. Intensity, the hue, the value, the saturation. Whether it's translucent, we can see through it. Whether it's opaque, the opacity. Whether it's warm or cool color, primary colors, secondary colors, complementary colors. So for example here, this is Picasso's Girl Before a Mirror. And a couple things that jump out at me, right? I'm looking at the mirror here. He's got this blue and orange, really pops. Those are complementary colors. The red and the green really pops. And we see repetition of form, repetition of circles, repetition of stripes, the pattern in the background, right? So like repetition becomes part of the vocabulary here, and pattern, right? How the face is broken up, We can also talk about what he's doing on a flat surface. He's rotating one face so that we see a silhouette of it, and another part of the face is looking out at us. As you describe your work, you're going to be starting to layer information and meaning. That's just in a little example. In sculpture, you talk about scale. You might talk about in the round versus relief. In the round, like when we think of Michelangelo's David, that's in the round. There's nothing there backing it. Whereas relief work, we'll look at this Brunelleschi and Ghiberti piece that really kicked off the Renaissance in a second. Directionality, we have movement within the form. Organic or geometric shapes. Is something open? Does it have space? Is it closed? Right? What's the texture of the material? What's the volume, the light and the shadow, color? And is the artist adding on, or are they carving away? Also, as we start looking at installation, you're going to talk about how things are placed, the context, the environment that it lives in. All right. So over here on the left-hand side, you'll see this was a competition for the baptistry doors in Florence, and this kind of kicked off the Renaissance in that it was a competition, and it really became a period of time where rivals really worked to be the best. And Brunelleschi is over here on the left, and on the right is Ghiberti. Ghiberti wins this competition. Brunelleschi's so upset he flees. He goes to Rome. He's really upset. Some of the things you might notice, right? You might talk about the way they're carved, right? It is relief work. Some of it is a little deeper. Language you might use, right? Ghiberti's is a little bit more calm. It's a little bit more balanced. You can see the figures are kind of upright and occupying their spaces. The angel is around, right? Abraham was about to kill his son, and the angel saying stop, right? But it's more of a scene where we're stepped back and examining it. Over here in Brunelleschi's, it's far more intense, right? You can see the way the carving, the movement in it is a little bit more tumultuous. The angel's actually holding Abraham. And so how you analyze these pieces could help yield a narrative, okay? You probably could go a few different ways with the narrative on that, and that's fine. So for context, how does the time period, the place, affect how we see the work? For whom was the work produced? Was it for collectors or institutions? And also for even the viewer perceiving it. As we talk about the work from pop to present, sometimes we're going to have radically different reads on pieces depending on who's the viewer, and it's important to keep that in mind. This would be a good example of how context can affect things. This is Faith Ringgold's piece. It's from the mid-'60s. It's called "The Flag is Bleeding." Now, there were a lot of racial tensions in America in the 60s. I don't know how much of the civil rights movement and the struggles of black Americans to get equal rights. And, in 16 states in 1967, black and white individuals could not even marry in this country. So there was a huge struggle going on in America at that time. Some people might argue there's a lot of tensions today as well. We look at some of the current protests of the treatment of African Americans by the police, and depending on who you are, the context could define how you might read a painting. This might be a piece that we look at when we look at political art in the 60s in the second unit. We'll talk more about it, but that's an example of how context, right? This piece might not have been as relevant in the 70s or 80s to the national conversation, but now it might be more relevant again. This is the piece, Coca-Cola plan, that you're going to be writing about, right? So here is where I would encourage you to think about the two elements, right? 2D work, because there is a collage element, there is a drawing element to this. There's also sculptural elements. You might want to think about, is it additive? Did he carve those bottles? Did he just find those bottles? And so what is the procedure for making this piece? Okay. This is in one of your assignments. Have a great time with it. You're going to, first off, don't get so smart. Don't tell us what it means. Really just describe it. Then start thinking, this is what it might mean. And I have some cues to help you think about context then and context now. Okay? I look forward to seeing your responses. And if you have any questions about this, please just email me. I'm happy to answer any questions, especially if I wasn't clear about something. I could reply for the whole group as well. Thank you so much.